Most channels begin with a bang, a hero in a cape, a dramatic reveal, a promise of easy wonder. We're going to begin somewhere quieter, somewhere truer, and somewhere far darker. This is the origin story of the man whose voice you're hearing right now. No costume, no secret identity, just a child who started falling a very long time ago and never quite stopped. What follows is not fiction. Every word you're about to hear actually happened. It happened to me. By the end of this first transmission, you'll understand why this channel exists at all. You'll understand what you've walked into. And you'll have one last chance to leave before the water gets too deep. So let me be clear. The way a condemned man is clear. This channel is for adults only. Children should be nowhere near it. We will speak openly about things that polite society pretends do not exist. We will stare into theistic terror, philosophical abyss, and cosmic dread without blinking. We will drag you gently, mercilessly, to the outer dark of consciousness and the inner dark of the human condition. If those words already unsettle you, then you should close the tab now. No judgment. Self-preservation is a virtue. But if something in you has always suspected that reality was just a little bit thinner than they told you, if you've ever woken at 3 a.m. certain that the walls themselves were listening, if you've ever felt the universe looking back and grinning at you with too many teeth, then stay. Buckle up. Turn the lights low. And don't pause for too long, because once we begin, the only way out is through. And we're going all the way down to the bottom of a rabbit hole where I have been existing for a very long time. Most people get a childhood. I got a 3-day descent into hell at the age of 5. In the fall of 1983, in an old rented farmhouse on the outskirts of Lake Zurich, Illinois. The house itself is gone now, bulldozed decades ago, and the land subdivided into courts and cul-de-sacs that have no memory of what happened inside those walls. And that's probably for the best. I was a scrawny kid, with a big mouth and bigger opinions, and going to bed hungry had already become a routine. That night, my mother sent me upstairs to bed again without supper. I was mad the way only a 5-year-old can be mad. Lips sealed, fist clenched, nuclear. Instead of going to my own room, I crept across the hall into hers. On the nightstand sat one small, unmarked white tablet. To me, it looked exactly like the kind of candy that adults keep for themselves. So I thought, fine, I'll just eat your candy then. And I popped it in my mouth. Instantly, I knew I'd made a mistake. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't candy. It was bitter and chalky and chemical. Like licking a battery dipped in aspirin. My first instinct was to spit it out, but the taste was so foul, I swallowed hard just to scrape it away. And as I did, 400 milligrams of methaqualone went sliding down my 40-pound throat. The adult equivalent of well over 1,400 milligrams. Enough to kill. Or enough to open doors that were never meant to be open. I remember thinking that was gross, and nothing more. Then I walked back over into my room, crawled up into my bed, and fell asleep like I did any other night. Some unknown amount of time later, I woke up and It was just wrong. The air had turned thick and hostile. Even the silence of the room sounded off, like being underwater. And I sat up and looked at the window next to my bed. There were two human-shaped smears of neon light that were sliding straight through the wall. No resistance, no sound, just ethereal arms reaching at me through the wall that should have been solid wood. The terror was so complete that my voice simply disappeared. I opened my mouth to scream for my mom and nothing came out. For the first and only time in my life, I felt absolute fear. I bolted across the hall into her room. Her bed was made. The lights were off. It was empty. Then the neon things whipped around the outside corner of the second floor of our house and began phasing straight through my mother's bedroom wall, exactly like they had in mine. Arms pouring through brick and wood, fingers already inside the room, stretching towards me while the rest of their bodies were still sliding through the solid wall, like smoke forcing its way through a keyhole. So I ran. I tumbled down the stairs so fast I nearly went headfirst into the dark. The only thing that kept me standing up was the banister. I had a death grip on it as I slid down stair by stair. At the bottom of the stairs, the open laundry room doorway had become a living wall of eyes. Thousands of them, lidless, all sizes, tracking my every twitch, stacking on top of each other as they filled the doorway completely from floor to ceiling. I crab slid the last few stairs with my back pressed tight to the wall, forcing myself not to turn away from them. But then I rounded the corner into the living room, and I thought the worst was over. But I was so wrong. The living room that lay before me was dark and filthy. It was like stepping into another world, a lightless, ancient version of our own world. As I stood there, confused by this, I saw cats starting to crawl out from behind every piece of furniture. Hundreds of them. Dirty, matted, mange-eaten cats, thick with decades of alley filth. Every pair of eyes glowed a sickly, uniform yellow, as though a spotlight was shining straight into them from where I stood. They all saw me at once. They arched their backs and exposed their fangs, letting out a collective, single, continuous growl that rattled my teeth and made me pee myself. I could feel nothing but their hatred of me in that moment, the wetness in my underwear, and my shame for what I had just done. I dropped to my hands and knees, sobbing hard, crawling along, whispering sorry over and over and over as I tried to keep heading towards the front door. And then, obeying the oldest rule in the horror handbook, I looked up. The ceiling was gone, replaced by an infinite spider web that filled the sky. From every strand, millions of small white spiders, pale as bone, legs thin and frantic, bodies no bigger than a grain of rice, descended in perfect silence on silvery threads. And that was the off switch. My mother says that I vomited and collapsed. She had never left the room that I thought was empty. She watched me burst in, mute with terror, and then bolt back out. She followed me at a distance, trying to understand what was happening to her child. She watched with growing horror as she saw me crawling along the living room floor and wet myself, and began sobbing. Just as I was about to reach the door, I collapsed and began to seize. She rode with me in the ambulance while they pumped the breathing bag, taking me straight to Alexian Brothers Hospital in Elk Grove, Illinois, where they pumped charcoal into my stomach for the next 3 days straight. When I finally woke up, the memory felt too strange to be real. My mind filed it away as the worst nightmare a kid ever had moved on. For the next 22 years, that's exactly what I believed it was, a nightmare. But it never left me. Starting at around age 8 or 9, the same sequence began replaying every few nights on a loop. Neon men phasing through the walls to get me, a doorway filled with eyes, the dirty, growling cats, and it always ended with small white spiders dropping from the sky. I'd wake up soaked in sweat or urine, heart hammering, unable to go back to sleep. By 13 or 14, the nightmares were so frequent and so vivid that I was terrified to close my eyes. School collapsed. Depression and anxiety moved in permanently. Steady D's and F's across the board. Then at 16, I discovered weed. One hit before bed and poof, the projector in my skull had finally run out of film. My dreams all vanished, nightmares all vanished, blank slate. For the first time in a decade, I could rest. It was quiet again. 18 months later, I graduated with honors. Problem solved, or so I thought. Carried that story around with me for another decade as the craziest dream I'd ever had. I even told it as a crazy bar story a few times. And then one night, at age 27, I told it to my mother. She went white. She immediately started crying so hard she could barely breathe. And then after she'd had a moment to calm down and collect herself, she told me the parts I'd never been told. The pill, the ambulance, the 3 days of charcoal, the doctor saying that I might not wake up. In one conversation, the nightmare became a memory. The memory became trauma. And that trauma explained everything. Suddenly it all made sense. Always being afraid of that old farmhouse after we left it. Fleeting memories of being in a hospital. The nightmares on an endless loop. The way weed silenced them. The strange fearlessness I had always felt around large doses of psychedelics. And that feeling that I'd already been to the bottom of the well long before I ever chose to jump. All of it snapped into clear focus for the first time. That single bitter pill at the age of 5 had torn the veil off and then stapled it back just crooked enough that I've spent the rest of my life trying to line the edges up again. This channel is what still leaks out from behind those edges, from beyond that veil. Every story you will hear, some stranger than fiction, some true in ways that will knot your stomach, flows from that little white tablet on a nightstand in a house that no longer exists, in a town that I haven't lived in for over 30 years. And I'm still integrating it, even now. I probably always will be. That's why I will never flinch at existential dread, psychedelic madness, or the black throat of the void itself. The void was my very first field trip. Confusion signed my first permission slip. And dread? Dread handed me my first pair of big boy pants. And what happened next after that, you say? Well, we can talk about that another time. You have your origin story, for what it's worth. And if this story teaches you nothing else, it should be that sometimes silence is not golden.